Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG, and welcome to part 2 of our cube set review for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Links to part 1 will be down in the description below if you haven't seen that one. This is taken from our podcast Powerful Nothing that I co-host with James. If you want to listen to these set reviews early, go check out the podcast. It's available on all streaming platforms now. With that out of the way, time for me to hand it over to me. But moving on to green, James, do you want to take us away with our first green card of the day?
Yeah, for sure. So, first off in green, we have C-Note Scout. This is a single green mana for a 1/1 creature Merfolk Scout. And when C-Note Scout enters the battlefield, it explores. So, to remind you, that's reveal the top card of your library if it's land into hand. Otherwise, put a +1 counter on the Scout, and you can put it in graveyard or back on top. Listen, this is not a bad 1-drop, just on rate. You could argue better than an Isamaru, right? Be one, just a straight 1-mana 2/2. The issue, I think part of the issue is, though, right, that, 1-mana 1/1, put a land in your hand would be a good card. 1-mana 2/2, good card. But kind of different decks want them.
Yeah, very much.
And the fact that you don't know which one it is when you put it in your deck is a little bit awkward. And on top of that, green generally is not a color that really wants like a 1-mana beater. It wants to spend its 1-drops to ramp generally. Like, green doesn't really tend to do that super, super low curve aggro thing. Generally, green aggro decks are a bit more like start 2 to 4 mana creatures because they need them to be higher impact, right?
Yeah, a little bit like that is how traditionally cubes have been built, but like more traditional cubes will save the low green drops for ramp spells or for your mana dorks. But kind of where you put your aggro decks in your cube, like people can build cubes in various different ways. Like green does have a lot of decent like 1 and 2 drop aggressive creatures, and like you can build your cube that way. But yeah, I do agree that kind of like the majority of them don't, and also this doesn't go in either because you can't guarantee what it's going to be.
Yeah,
which is the tricky, which is specifically the trickier part with this card, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think that's the bit that makes it a bit difficult to include for me. I will say though, tribal is something that's kind of niche, but people do sometimes build just like tribal cubes, right? And Merfolk is one of the classics, and Merfolk has like very, very few good 1-drops. So this is a slam dunk if you're doing Merfolk. But outside of that, I'm kind of not quite there on it.
No, that's fair. From a 1-drop to an 8-drop, next we're talking about Galter, Stampede Tyrant. This is 5 green for a 12/12 legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur. It has trample, and when it enters the battlefield, you may put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Well, this is very big. The potential upside of this card is obviously huge. Like dumping your whole hand of fatties. In an ideal world, you can be living the dream with that. And again, it's an ETB, similarly to the trumpeting Carnosaur that we saw earlier. Means that like you can sneak attack this in, you can show and tell it in, and it will come with a bunch of friends. Mana and stat wise, it's I guess good. Like 5 mana for 12/12 with trample is good.
It's 8 mana, not 5 mana.
Wow, yeah, that would be good. That'd be good. Yeah. 8 mana for 12/12 with trample is good stats. I'm still not super overwhelmed by this, if I'm honest, and that's mainly because there's a very specific place where it goes. That place is mono green, and specifically the version of mono green that was on the Modo Cube earlier this year, where they put a load of creature tutors in it that put creatures into your hand. So you want to fill your hand with big creatures, cheat or ramp this into play, and then put everything you've tutored for into play as well. You swing, you win. The problem is that deck sucks. I think that's the nicest way of putting that. And this doesn't fix the problems of that deck. You don't need just another big dumb beater. And the fact, I think with most of the time with this card, you won't be putting anything else into play with it. This is going to be the last card in your hand a lot of the time. And it doesn't win you the game on the spot. This isn't Crater Hoof. It doesn't make the whole rest of your board and give you that swing straight away. This can still be answered before attacks. Your board can be wrathed. That basically adds up to a card that, while in Commander, I think is phenomenal, and I will put that caveat in case anyone is questioning me. This is a very good card in the right format, but that format is not Cube, basically.
Yeah, that was exactly the point I was going to make. Your 8-drop is generally going to be the last thing you cast. You need it to win the game on its own. You don't want it to say, hey, look at this other 8-drop. I needed to have 2 to make it good. No, play 8-drops to win the game if you have to play 8-drops. Yes, certainly no Crater Hoof. I think a lot worse than like a Woodfall Primus as well, to be honest. Yes, it's huge, but at the point where generally the argument of, this creature dies to removal is not a good one, but at the point where you're spending 8 mana, I don't think it's really acceptable to just have it get, Doombladed and not get any value out of it, which I think is often what's going to happen with the card.
Yeah, especially when we have other dinosaurs that are better protecting themselves, something like a Carnage Tyrant or something like that is like, it's less raw stats, but it's harder to deal with, basically. Like, if you want a big dumb green thing that's going to be attacking your opponents, you're more likely to play that. If you want to cheat something into play, you play Natural Order rather than this. Like, and the thing is, because this is I can't see a world where this card is cheap either. I don't think I can recommend it like lower power level or more budget cubes.
Oh no, there's the mono green commander players are going to love it, aren't they?
Yeah, it's pre-ordering for $25.
Yeah, checks out.
That will come down in price, obviously. Like, it's not out yet. Like, I always actually normally vastly ignore pre-sale costs unless it proves a point of mine on a podcast. But apart from that, yeah.
Okay, so next up we have Jade Light Spelunker. This is X and a green for a 1/1 creature Merfolk Scout. And when it enters the battlefield, it explores X times. So for 2 mana, you get a 1/1 that explores once and scales up from there. So for 6 mana, it explores 5 times. So listen, X threats like this play pretty well, right? Because they're theoretically acceptable on every point of the curve. Is the upside. I think this one's just a little bit too inefficient everywhere, though. We weren't happy about the 1 mana 1/1 that explores once, so obviously we're not happy about paying 2 mana for this. And then then you say, okay, we cast it for like 5 or 6 mana then, which sure, but equally really good green 5 and 6 drops, and exploring X times is nice because it, when you get into large numbers, because what you're probably going to do is you'll draw maybe a land or 2, but then when you hit a good draw for next turn, you can stop, right? You can just keep putting that card on top. So you are guaranteeing yourself a good play next turn, probably, when you cast this. But having said that, equally, if you see the good card on the first explore, it's a bit tricky because if you keep that on top for all of them and you're not drawing into any lands, right? So you might kind of be forced to put that into a graveyard. But even then, you've kind of still just paid like a 6 mana 5/5, and I kind of don't think it's good enough.
I'm a little higher on this card, but that's kind of because I actually quite liked Jade Light Ranger, which was the 3 mana version, and it explores twice. So for 3 mana, Jade Light Ranger is slightly more efficient than this, I think. With more pound tappers. But so the way this plays out a lot of the times is that it can be your Gruul beta, or it is quite good at putting stuff into the graveyard. If you're doing something like that in Golgari, so it's basically if you're trying to beat down in Gruul, it won't be the most optimal card in that deck, but it will be playable. But also in Golgari, if you're trying to fill up the graveyard, it is actually quite good at that. This will actually put a decent amount of cards into your graveyard while becoming bigger, if that's what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah, the Jade Line Ranger comparisons when we ran a little bit, because I did like that card. And, this is only 1 mana, 1 power smaller when you play it on 3 mana, right? So I do think it's better than Jade Light Ranger. But equally, it's not like we're putting Jade Light Ranger in a bunch. Like, I think it's a fine card, but
Yeah, that's one that's coming in and out along with Golgari Grave Troll, if I'm honest with you. But
sure.
yeah,
Not gonna lie, I didn't notice when it was in.
Wow. Yeah, I played it and did not win with it. But yeah. One thing with J-Light Ranger is that it is double green. It's one double green to cast, and the decks I was putting it in were kind of Jundy, so the mana requirements on this are a bit easier. But whether that makes this playable, we're not sure, or I'm not sure over that. But yeah, we'll definitely see. But moving on now to another green creature. Next we have Sentinel of the Nameless City. This is 2 and a green for a 3/4 Merfolk Warrior Scout with Vigilance, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, create a map token. So this is just a very good body that spits out artifact tokens. Those tokens can grow this creature or another creature, which is nice. And you get it on ETB and when it attacks. So this could, when this attacks on turn 4, this could be a 5/6. Which is pretty big. In terms of specifically like the synergy with the artifact tokens, it's not something at the moment that Green super cares about. There was that kind of like junk archetype in Modern Horizons 2 with like Ionis, I think it is, and Chatterfang, or Lonis.
Yeah.
And Chatterfang, that's it. Yeah. It's kind of, it cared about like tokens in general, like Lonis and Chatterfang. That hasn't really transitioned over to Cube yet, but as just more cards seem to be coming with like artifacts tacked onto them. Eventually we'll get to a point where like there will be rewards for it in green as well as the other colors. At that point this card will get a lot better, but just for the time being, 3 mana 3/4 Vigilance is quite good, with the upside of buffing up maybe this creature or a different creature to make your attacks a bit better. I quite like this card.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on this card actually. So big. Like, you get this out, imagine you get this out off an elf on turn 2. It's just going to be so much bigger than everything else in play. And it's going to be really easy to snowball that value. Right? And even if you don't have the mana to crack the map straight away, that's still just going to be sitting there. And they're going to be good later in the game. Just to like filter out lands from the top of your decks and throw your creatures. Yeah, I'm pretty high on this. I'm kind of imagining this in like maybe a green-red or green-black, like fairly aggressive deck. Not going up for massive stuff, but like play a dog, play a 3 on turn 2 and a 4 on turn 3 sort of deck. And it seems like a really good 3 to do that with, and it's only 1 green.
No, that's actually. Do you like this more than Jade-Light Ranger?
Yes. Yeah, not close.
What about in a like even in like a self-milli type of deck? This will still give you 2 abilities to explore by the time it attacks. That's quite good.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the issues I've had with the Golgari deck that we've spoken about throughout this episode is I've had to play a lot of bad cards. This is a good card that could go in that. That's kind of how I feel I've kind of fixed Gruul recently, is just play good cards.
It does help.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, do you want to take it away with our first multicolored card, James?
Next up, we have Amalia Benavides Aguirre. Apologies to a vast amount of the world with that pronunciation.
I've been to Spain this year. That was beautiful, James.
Why, thank you. So Amalia is a white and a black for a 2/2 legendary creature vampire scout. It has ward, pay 3 life, and whenever you gain life, Amalia Benavide explores, then destroy all other creatures if its power is exactly 20. I think we can agree that destroying all the other creatures if its power is exactly 20 doesn't matter. Okay. Oh, no, yeah, okay, I can kind of see it. But the good things this card does do. Firstly, if your white-black can do a lot of the aristocracy stuff, and it can do a lot of life-gainy stuff. And this kind of plays nicely with both, because the aristocracy stuff has blood artists. Blood artists get you a lot of triggers of gaining 1 life, and that's enough to explore off this, so it's going to get you plenty of value, it's going to get pretty big, and filter out the lands from the top of your deck. All good stuff. Also, if you're doing white-black as a life gain deck, this is kind of just better than something like a Johnny's Pridemate, I think. Like, you're getting that selection, you're getting lands, and a lot of time you'll get the counter as well. And, Johnny's Pridemate is kind of like the classic payoff for a life gain deck, right? So this certainly seems like an auto-include if you're doing black-white life gain. On top of that, there is kind of a bit of combo potential here. With a card, I assume from somewhere in the original Ixalan block, called Wildgrowth Walker. Standard players of that era will remember this card. It says 1 green for a 1/3, and whenever you explore Wildgrowth Walker gains you 3 life, and you put, I believe it's 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Just 1 +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, cool. But it actually doesn't matter, because we're going to get infinite explores if we combine these 2 cards, because when we gain the first life, so we need an initial life gain trigger or an explore trigger, but then the life gain will trigger Amalia will explore, that will trigger Wildgrowth Walker, but will gain as life, we'll explore again, we'll keep going. And then this is the spot where potentially the 20 power can start mattering, because we will eventually get up to 20. So if we pull this off, infinite explores will be on infinite life.
Well, no, so that's where this comes in, because it's when its power gets to 20 that will, in theory, that will happen while you're exploring at some point. Like basically the ceiling of the combo is you gain about 50 life, and you have a 20/20 on play, which is Amalia, and everything else is destroyed, including your combo piece that will go with it.
Okay, so we're not quite getting to infinite, but we are getting a 20/20 in play on an empty board. Very good. And in the event that our opponent is not dead, we'll also basically cast a Vampiric Tutor at that point. We'll have explored, we'll be able enough times that we're basically able to find the best card on our deck and put it on top. It's not going to be difficult to win the game from that point. Most likely this probably, like, if this isn't summoning sick, you're just hitting for 20 straight away, and even if it is, you're going to be in a very good spot. Wildgrowth Walker is not exactly what we'd call a cube staple at the moment, and I don't think I've ever seen it in a cube. But there's a lot of map tokens and a lot of explore in this set. It's not an unreasonable... Like, if you want to lean into that a little bit, like, you could include Wildgrowth Walker, and then you kind of get this nice little 1-2 combo as well. I think this card's kind of interesting. I think it sort of does a lot of different things, and I like that. It means it's not just going into one archetype.
No, exactly. Like the little creature-based combos, I do quite like. Like we struggled a little bit with persist combos in mine, but like the fact that this needs like a soul sister to kick things off. There are some other combos like that. Like you have like Squirrel Twin, the historic deck, which does also need a soul sister to kick things off. You also have just other like life gain like combos in my in cubes with like Heliod Walking Ballista or like Spike Feeder, that kind of thing. I'm not sure maybe you want Amalia in that, or maybe it's just another piece. But basically, there is a package of cards there. It's finding how it works and how it goes together. But like, I think like Amalia, Wildgrowth Walker, stuff like Prosperous Innkeeper, maybe a couple of other Soul Sister type cards that gain you life when a creature comes into play. Maybe the Heliod and and the Scurry Oak, and then there's a bigger version of Scurry Oak. Maybe these kind of cards can make a package eventually of like creature combos in the same way that kind of Persist has sort of kind of got into some cubes recently. There could be something there, and like basically that's, I think, that is when Amalia becomes actually really interesting to me if it's a piece in that puzzle. But yeah, the base level, it is just an Ajani's Pride, mate. I do agree with that. That's kind of a separate thing. Like if you're doing life gain, then probably just throw this in. It'll be good. It's also a signpost to it being in white black. And if you get to and if you're doing it fairly, that's actually quite cool. If you can get to the 20 power, destroy the whole board thing, that's very cool if you're doing a life gain thing with that.
Yeah, for sure. It is worth noting with this combo, though, that you do need to another thing to kick it off. You need to in life or explore initially to get the ball rolling. But certainly a powerful interaction.
Yeah, and I would assume the life gain is probably the easier thing to trigger.
In general, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. From one build-around card to another. Damn, our segues are good today. Next, we have the Ancient One. It is a blue and a black for an 8/8 legendary creature, Spirit God. It has Descend 8, which means the Ancient One can't attack or block unless there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. It also has 2 a blue and a black, draw a card, then discard a card. When you discard a card this way, target player mills cards equal to its mana value. So obviously, 2 mana for an 8/8 is just good. But realistically, the question is how easy is this going to be to turn on and activate? Best case scenario, if you crack some lands and do some self-mill, maybe turn 4? I want to say turn 4. If that's consistent, that might be good enough. So for me, this is very much a card that goes into a deck that we've spoken about a bit in this episode, that cares about the number of things in your graveyard. Rather than something like Reanimator, which cares about having specific things in your graveyard. This is going to a deck with, like Hogak or Spider Spawning, things like that. Rather than, like your Reanimator, which wants like specifically like the big thing in the graveyard, or even decks that are using the graveyard as a resource with like Delve. Like this doesn't want to be in a deck with spells with Delve because it'll be a creature and then it won't be able to, like, it can attack and then it can't attack or can't block, and that's really annoying. The discard part, I think, is fine. That is maybe where it could overlap with Reanimator, but 4 mana to do that is a little bit much. Like it's a discard outlet that you will use. You're not happy about it. It's definitely something I want to test, but I'm not sure what the shell of this looks like, unless it is just like go ham with your Stitcher Supplier and your self-mill. Is that where this is? Like, I've heard of some like combo stuff with like fight rigging, I think, in like standard maybe. Like what's your thoughts on this card, James? Where do you see it, if you see it at all?
What I wrote down initially was, no, you would need to play actual dredge cards. But it sounds like we're into playing actual dredge cards, potentially.
James, we're always into... That's my secret, James.
Listen, if we're trying to do this thing with the Souls of the Lost, the bad Tarmogoyf we spoke about earlier, then I guess this goes in that deck, right? Like, it is a pretty big... It is pretty big if you can get there. But, man, it's just... 8's a lot. 8 is a lot. And it's an 8 permanents, not just 8 cards, 8 permanents, which is probably going to be like 11, 12 cards.
Yeah, like it's not like Threshold, which was just 7 cards, isn't it?
Exactly. And Threshold was like not trivial to turn on. And then, the looting is just way too expensive, I think. Like, I mean, not that like it won't come up, but like that's not a reason to play the card.
Like, there could be a world where just in very grindy, control-y games, that this is more like limited Magic. Like this is more pre-release. You're milling out an opponent with this. That's more what's happening actually with the bottom ability. In Cube in general, graveyard, or in everything I play anyway, the graveyard is a resource, and generally fueling up your opponent is not necessarily a good thing. Like, unless you are fully milling them out. Like, unless you are winning that turn by doing it. Filling up a graveyard is generally a resource for your opponent nowadays, with like Delirium and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think that's a reasonable reason to play this card. I think you'd have to be like turboing to 8 permanents really, really quickly and trying to use this as a beta. It sounds like way too many hoops jump through to me for a creature that, again, no keywords. You can just trump block it. And it, it doesn't have any resilience to removal. So for me, it's kind of just not worth the setup.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's also worth mentioning that just like, even me, someone who loves graveyard decks, I still run Scavenging Ooze and like Lion Sash and Endurance, and there are cards that should be running Cube to keep graveyards in check, which will just make this. I could actually imagine just this being so infuriated with having this card in play, and just I get to 8, I go to combat, my opponent Scavenging oozes something out of my graveyard.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, now it can't attack, and now Scavenging Ooze is bigger than this. Fine, attack. Like, wonderful.
Yeah. I'm not expecting to lose to this card anytime soon. I'll say that.
Fair.
Except for maybe in pre-release.
Okay, let's go. Yeah, we have that.
Yeah.
Next weekend, let's go.
Yeah.
Or yesterday at release, at time of release, the time you're hearing this, it was yesterday. You'll hear about it on the next episode.
Sure will. Okay, next up we have a card which I anticipate losing to a lot. This is Anim Pakal, Thousandth Moon. This is 1 a red and a white for a 1/2 legendary creature human soldier. Whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anim Pakal, then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal. This is like one of the stronger Rebel Master type variants, I think.
Yeah, this is a beating.
This gets out of control really, really quickly. So say you play like a 2-drop and your 2-drop has an attack, and then you play this. So you're swinging with your 2-drop, you're getting a token right away, you're getting a counter on this right away. Then the very next turn, this is going to attack as a 3/4, so it's going to be pretty hard to block profitably, and you're getting 2 more tokens. That's like just for first turn, you've got 3 tokens and a 3/4, and it gets scarier from there. You know, you're getting 3 tokens, 4 tokens, 5 tokens, and it's the fact that this doesn't have to attack as well. Like in the scenario where your opponent has assembled enough blockers for this to not have a good attack, well, your evasive creature can still attack. You can still get this trigger. You're going to be building up more counters. You'll be generating more tokens. Sure, they can probably eat some of those tokens in combat, but by the time this is creating 4 tokens, they probably don't have enough creatures to block all of them. So you could, it's going to be really hard to not have this generate a decent amount of value if it sticks around, I think. Yeah, I like obviously the disadvantage versus the other Rabbleman variants, so Rabblemaster, Krenko, and Ware Battlements, etc., is that this is 2 colors. But I think you are getting paid for that. Like this does snowball a lot quicker than some of those other cards.
No, exactly. And like there's other parts of this card that are just upside. Like the fact that they're artifact creatures is not nothing. Like that could be very important. Like we've seen like some modular stuff in Boros. This does stuff with counters. You can sack your tokens to an Arcbound Ravager, stuff like that. That is all very strong. And then also just even more fairly than that, just like the default strategy for Boros in a lot of cubes is just tokens. Like with your Rabble Masters, with your Adelines. Like what's the 5 mana one that's run in the Vintage Cube? That's like a big Rabble Master.
Oh, Afari?
That's it. Yeah. Like that. This could just be something that like Boros does. Just turns things sideways and makes a load of tokens. Yeah, you have a card like Intangible Virtue, which maybe you can make work in your Boros section. Like if you're making tokens with this, with Rabble Master, with Adeline, and there's a whole host of other cards that do it as well. That's a pretty solid like Boros section. It's aggressive. It's rewarding you for being in 2 colors because you're getting the best. You're getting cards that work from both colors, and maybe that's the way Boros can go to be cool. Like, I'm always looking for ways to make Boros interesting. It's also a human.
We've been bad.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, cool card. It's going to kill a lot of players. All right, I'm assuming this is the one that you said was going to be difficult to pronounce. But we'll give it a go.
I wish you luck.
We have Bartolome del Presidio. Del Presidio.
Flawless.
Yes.
Do not cut any of it.
No, it's all staying it. It is a white and a black for a 2/1 legendary creature vampire knight. It is an uncommon, interestingly, which is quite nice. It has sacrifice another creature or artifact, put a +1 on counter on Bartolome del Presidio. So, 3 sacrifice outlets are normally... Actually, no, they are just very good. They're a cornerstone of all like aristocrat decks. The fact that this is free and has the bonus of also being a sacrifice outlet for artifacts, which is not something you normally see, I think is very nice. I think that means that this is going to be a good card, and basically if you're doing anything sacrifice related in Orzhov, be it creatures more traditionally, or be it like artifacts, you should consider running this card. There's plenty of spells that reward you for sacrificing artifacts. Try this card. I think it's just going to be good. Like, I think this is probably better than Cartel Aristocrat, which was the other free sacrifice outlet that those decks could run before. That one was a 2/2 for a free sacrifice outlet, but just getting protection from a color. This gets bigger. So while that will get through for damage, initially this will just get bigger and bigger and snowball and just kill your opponent. I think it's quite good.
Yeah, I agree with all that. We've seen people play things like Nantuko Husk just to have a free sack outlet, right? Which is more mana than this and just gets a temporary bump. This is certainly a stronger card than that. Obviously, the downside is, if you're in a red-black aristocrats deck and you see this as the free sack outlet, then you're a bit sad about it. But I think it does pay you off enough for the extra color, but this one's probably worth it. Yeah, so next up, we are moving into Golgari with Compy Swarm, is how I'm going to say that. This is 1 a black and a green for a 2/2 creature dinosaur rare. As at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, create a tapped token that's a copy of Compy Swarm. There's obviously a bit of setup here, but this is kind of an interesting card, I think. It has potential to snowball pretty hard, because it's, if you can trigger this a couple of turns, then, you trigger this once, you have 2 of them. Trigger them again, then you have 4. Exponential growth is powerful. Anyone who's been on the wrong side of a Scoot Swarm knows this.
Yeah.
But it does require a lot of setup, right? Because it is not giving you great fodder to sacrifice. Once you're up to a large number of these, then you can start sacrificing like 1 trigger, right? But you'd need some fodder to start off sacrificing, right? And it doesn't give you a sack outlet. And your opponent's presumably reading your cards and playing appropriately, and so isn't just going to randomly trade with your creatures if they can avoid it when you have this in play. So it's kind of unfortunate that it only triggers on your end step, so they can, if they really want to kill one of the other creatures, they can do it on their turn. It also doesn't work if you're like blocking and trading off creatures. You have to be trading on your turn. Obviously, your opponent has more control about that because they decide whether to block or not. I do think there's something here, though. I think you get paid off enough. And you've got to be pretty not all in, but you've got to draft around this card pretty specifically, I think. And also, like, green-black is... green isn't one of the, normal core aristocrats colors, although it does, definitely have a bit of that stuff going on with, morbid cards and stuff like that. I want this to work. I want it to be good, and I want to try it. I suspect it might end up being too much setup cost, but I don't know. If I see it in a cube, I'm going to try.
No, I think that's fair. I really like this card. I think the issue I have, and this might not... by the end of this, I might have talked myself around to this not being an issue, but I will explain my thinking. Is that this kind of, you obviously don't want to play this when you're not guaranteeing that you're going to activate it. No one is paying 3 mana for a 2/2 in 2023. That's just not happening. So that means it's going into a deck with sacrifice stuff, ways of triggering it, which means it's probably aristocrats. And the issue with that is most cubes, like an aristocrat deck is always black as its core color, but then traditionally it's either white or red as a second color. In cube at the moment, it's not often green. That doesn't mean it can't be. Like, we are in a world with triomes existing, like 4-color decks could just be a thing. And I do actually think green is probably really good for aristocrats, and a lot of like especially in like when I've looked at the decks in like Canadian Highlander and stuff, like they are splashing into green a lot because you just have a lot of very good creatures that replace themselves as well as token makers and stuff in green. So maybe this could be a way Golgari goes. That's kind of the part I'm having trouble with. Basically, is like, can you actually build the deck around this? Does it exist enough to actually make this card good enough? Like they could just be just Golgari aristocrats with like grist and cool stuff like that. Maybe that's the deck. But like traditionally, that isn't where a lot of people are putting their aristocrats sections at the moment. And more cards like this will help push it towards green. But for the moment, it's trickier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is worth noting it doesn't have to be your creature that dies.
No, that's true. Yeah, if you're killing a creature,
if you just Doomblade their guy, it will trigger it. And that's definitely a way that you can trigger it like first time, right? But for this card to actually be good, it feels like you need to trigger it multiple turns in a row. And it's going to be... I mean, it's not impossible to do that with just removal spells, but that won't be something that happens most games.
No, exactly. That makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, in general, you're going to want something a bit more reliable to have that engine running.
Let's move on. We are back to Selesnya now. John, have we been to Selesnya yet? No. We are moving on to Selesnya now with Kellen, Daring Traveller. It is 1 white for a 2/3 legendary creature, human fairy scout. It has, whenever it attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card with mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. But it also has an adventure. It has Journey On, which is a single green. It is a sorcery adventure with create X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. As we spoke about when we did the Eldraine set review, we do like 2 spells tacked onto 1 card. So let's talk about the adventure first. So base level, it's a green and it makes you a map token. If they have an artifact, it could end up being 2. That's fine. That's not really worth a card by itself. The 2 mana, 2/3 creature that when it attacks can draw us a card. We do like, however, that is pretty solid. And then also with the explore from the map, you can use it to set up the top of your library, so you're more likely to get the extra bit of card advantage. You're more likely to consistently get the card on top that you can then draw with Callan. That's quite nice. But I do also think that you don't actually need to necessarily be a Selesnya deck to get advantage from this. Like, it's a single green that's very splashable. You can cast off a Triome, a Talisman, or a Treasure. You don't need to be a full-blown Selesnya deck. But I think the creature part is probably fine enough by itself as just a early creature that gives you some repeatable card advantage. Because if you're in a white aggro deck, a lot of your creatures are going to be mana value 3 or less. Like, if this draws you a card over the course of a game, then you're probably happy with it. Would you agree, James?
Yeah, 100%. I think you can view this as a white 2-drop, but occasionally has a bit of upside if you have some green mana in your deck. In the sort of rankings of white 2-drops available, this isn't like tier 1, it's not up there with the Stoneforge Mystics and the like. But you need quite a few 2-drops in white to support white aggressive decks, and this is a fine one. If you're running something like, I don't know, Seasoned Hallowblade in the sort of slightly less powerful white 2-drop slot that you need a couple of, I think this is like a comparable power level to that, and you could certainly try this one. And hey, occasionally you're in Selesnya and you get a bit of upside because, if you find a spot to cast Journey On, it doesn't really cost you. Then, getting those. We have 1 opponent, so we will get 1 or 2 map tokens, and that can be relevant later in the game.
No, cool, makes sense.
All right. Next up, we have Molten Collapse. This is a black and a red for a sorcery. Choose one, but if you descended this turn, you may choose both instead. I don't think we have seen descended yet, so I'll read that. You have descended if a permanent card was put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn. So that's not a difficult thing to do. A fetch land will get you descended. You can cycle a card if one of your creatures died. Any of those things will give you descended for your turn. So what are the two modes? The first mode is destroy target creature or planeswalker. That's already great. Black and a red, destroy target creature or planeswalker. That's Dreadbore. That's a very powerful, very efficient, very flexible card. We love it. And the second mode is destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. Obviously, we are using the first mode way more than the second one here. But when the second one you sometimes get for free, that's a really good upside. You can pick off... I think, see, this is like a little better in powered cubes in some ways, because you can snipe Moxen and Solvings and whatnot with that second mode, and that's great. But even in cubes without that, people will have like blood or maps or treasure, stuff like that lying around. Maybe you have some cheap enchantments or artifacts. This card's great. Like, Dreadball was already great, and this is strictly better. And it's kind of pretty meaningfully better, honestly. It's not that hard to trigger Descended, and I think like maybe 70% of the time you cast this, it will just be as a Dreadball, but the other 30% is going to feel really good when you get two things.
So I agree with everything you said. I don't like this for Cube personally. And it's not that this isn't a strong card. It's more like what you're doing with your guild slots, if that makes sense.
Sure.
It's more like I have generally tried to steer clear of just running good generic cards in my guild slots that are effects that you can find in the individual colors. So my argument is kind of, and everyone builds their cube differently, and this is kind of just the how I tend to go with it. It's kind of, this doesn't necessarily reward you for being in Rakdos in the same way that kind of like a synergistic archetype card would necessarily. Like, this is a card that kind of like someone would like happily splash for, if that makes sense. Like anyone who can cast this is taking it up, rather than anyone who is in a deck can take it up or can pick it up. That doesn't mean this card isn't strong and shouldn't see play. Like, I could see this card making I think in power because what you mentioned about the ability for it to nerf like cheap artifacts and Moxen and stuff. I think that's very strong, and that is probably a reason why it will see play in like more higher power level cubes. But in more kind of like synergy based cubes, like you can run these cards like it's the trap that like Golgari always falls into. Like, you always run like Abrupt Decay or like Pernicious Deed or like Assassin's Trophy. You always see these cards. But it's like black can kill things, like green less so, but kind of like the Golgari deck wasn't struggling to answer things. Play something to kind of make the deck stronger, and that's kind of where I think this falls into. Like nothing taken away from this card. It's a very strong card, but I think just in terms of specifically where it sits in cube, that's where I think personally I think it struggles a little bit.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I think that's a very reasonable approach to building cubes. I think it depends on the individual cube in question, right? But yeah, I think on power level, it's certainly a strong one.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. So moving on, next we have Permission Denied. This is a white and a blue. For an instant, counter target non-creature spell. Your opponent can't cast non-creature spells this turn. So I do know in everything I just said about the previous card and not running generically good cards in your guild sections, there is a little bit of an argument for this one. Like we'll get on to why you shouldn't run it in a minute, but like just in cubes, like Azorius can often be the control color. So if control is the archetype, then you have a bit more flexibility of just running just like good, efficient control cards. And that's kind of where counter spells fall into. The question of is this card good or not is a separate one. Because I think this card is kind of good at protecting a combo because it can counter a counter spell and they can't interact with you the rest of that turn. That's quite nice. But apart from that, I'm not sure where I want this card, which probably means it's a sideboard card. It doesn't stop creatures, which is a kind of a big deal because you have your pitch elementals, all this kind of stuff. The flip side is cool seeing Samuel L. Jackson on a Magic card. We do like that. If you're running it for that reason, I love that. Yeah, I don't think Permission Denied gets in there over just a lot of regular counter spells or even something like Dovin's Veto.
Yeah, that was the example I was going to read for. I think the upside on Dovin's Veto is significantly better than this one. The thing is, if they have multiple pieces of interaction, then a lot of the time they're going to just use the second piece of interaction in response to this card.
Yeah, exactly.
Resolved, right? I'm not saying there won't be situations where this is really good, but I think in general, Dovin's Veto, the upside on your negate is significantly higher. And you know what? If you have 2 Azoria slots in your cube and you decide for what you want to do with them is Permission Denied and Dovin's Veto, then all power to you. But I don't think that's going to be the case for most people.
No, fair. Very fair, very fair.
All right. Moving on, next up we have. Oh, this is going to be hard to say. Moving on, we have Sovereign Okinek Ahau. Is how I'm going to say that.
I like that.
Sovereign Okinek Ahau. This is 2 a green and a white for a 3/4 legendary creature Cat Noble. It has Ward 2. And whenever Sovereign attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than that creature's base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference. If that rule text didn't make any sense to you, I don't think you're alone in that.
I'm kind of really glad you got this one.
Yeah. So I'm going to attempt to maybe put this in a slightly easier to understand way. So basically, if you have a creature that has had its power buffed by any sort of effect, so if you have +1/+1 counters on it, or if you've cast a Giant Growth on it, or you have a Glorious Anthem in play, then that has power greater than its base power. So when you attack with that creature, say you cast a Giant Growth on your creature, then attacked. So its power is 3 greater than its base power, so you're going to put 3 +1/+1 counters on that creature. And that is true for all of your creatures. I think the spot where this card is actually potentially very powerful is a green-white +1/+1 counters deck, which is certainly something that crops up. Because the whole point of that deck is most of your creatures are going to have +1/+1 counters on them, therefore their power will be greater than their base power. So you could basically read this in that deck as whenever one of your creatures attack, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. And that's really powerful.
Yeah.
If you attack with your Walking Ballista and it goes from 2 counters to 4 counters.
Oh, okay. Yes, I always forget that Walking Ballista and Hanging Back Walker do really well with +1 counter synergy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it all stacks with your Hardened Scales effects and whatnot.
That's quite nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a certain amount of your deck has to already be doing its thing before this card does anything, right? It requires a little bit of setup, but this really does turbocharge those counter synergies. I think if you're supporting that deck in your cube, that is enough reason to at least try this. I think this is quite strong in that deck. I don't really see another spot you'd want it. It does do good stuff. If you have a Glorious Anthem, everything you attack with gets a counter, right? I don't think that's really enough to include it. But I think for +1/+1 counter decks specifically, I think this is quite a nice set.
No, sweet. Love it. Nice. All right, we're back to Golgari with Squirming Emergence. It is 1 black and a green for a sorcery. It has Fathomless Descent, which is return to the battlefield, target non-land permanent card in your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So this is another card for that Graveyard Matters deck that we've spoken about quite a bit. I do like this card. I think it's a strong effect. Late in the game, this could just get you back anything you want from the graveyard if you've been milling a ton. The issue with this card is that in the decks that want to self-mill, this does nothing in your graveyard. It doesn't count to descend if that's something you're caring about, if you're trying to get to that 8 number. I know it's more mana to cast on the front side, but I generally prefer Dread Return in those type of decks to this card. Dread Return is 4 mana to just reanimate a creature, but importantly, it has the flashback cost of sacrifice 3 creatures, which means that if you have dredged it or milled it into your graveyard, it's still a recursion spell in your graveyard. You can still use it. It's not just dead, which this has the issue of being potentially in those archetypes. Unless you're using a spell to get this back, to then use this spell to get something else back, that's a lot of hoops that you don't really want to be doing in a game of Cube. There could be a world where this is just perfectly fine in like mid-range piles as getting something back from the graveyard, but then kind of similarly to what we were saying about, or what I was saying about running guild cards that do an effect that one color can already do. Like, I don't think you need to run this over like Animate Dead or just any other kind of generic black recursion that color can already do. So I think that means I'm not super high on Squirming Emergence, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I think we've established I'm maybe a little bit low on this turbo self-mill. We have lots of permanents in our graveyard.
I would say that most people are lower than me, James. It's just a problem I have.
I'm happy taking the majority position, man. I don't like it in a mid-range deck. Like, reanimate effects are already like a little bit situational, right? It's not trivial that you have something in your graveyard you want to bring back. Adding another hoop to jump through of, my Shieldred's in my bin, but I can't reanimate it because I don't have 3 other permanents there. It's really rough when you're not even getting a particularly good rate in terms of mana efficiency, right? I'm not getting, if this costs like, I feel like this would going to cost 1 mana, honestly, before I'd be interested. But it's kind of rough. It doesn't even target their graveyard as well. You can only hit yours. I don't see it.
No, definitely makes sense. I'll quickly touch on the first artifact, if that's right. I'm not going to read it because it's a card that we have seen before. Just wanted to mention that Sorcerer's Spyglass has been downshifted from a rare to an uncommon, so it's now legal in Peasant. But yeah, just having this kind of like Pithing Needle effect in Peasant could be quite nice. Like, there are plenty of busted cards at Peasant. This is just a nice solid answer to a lot of them. Good card for Peasant. Just wanted to mention that it had been downshifted.
Yeah, no, Sorcerer's Spyglass is super solid. I think in a lot of cubes this is better than Pithing Needle. Just that extra information is really, really valuable. Obviously, it informs what you name, but also I think people just really underestimate the effect that knowing your opponent's hand has on the rest of the game. I will say that I think a lot of the really good stuff to name with Spyglass in other cubes is often Planeswalkers, which often you don't see a lot of in Peasant Cube. There are uncommon Planeswalkers, but they're not a huge part of those formats. But I mean, there's plenty of other stuff you can hit with this. I think could see running it in certain spots, but not having the out of hitting Planeswalkers as much, and the fact it doesn't hit mana abilities it's kind of rough.
That's it for artifacts, but we do have a number of lands I want to touch on. These are all creature lands. I think it's worth just quickly going over them and where they see play, because realistically, because they all come into play tapped and can't be fetched, it does mean they are going to struggle to get into a decent amount of higher power level leveled cubes. In budget cubes or in large cubes, I think they're actually pretty good. In budget, because a lot of the older ones have been repainted a ton, they are fairly cheap. And hopefully after a couple of reprints or after they've been through standard, these will be cheap as well. In large cubes, because like after like original duel, fetch, shock, fast land, pain land, there is room to decide what's next. So in a 720 or anything like that, at any power level, I potentially consider running a cycle of creature lands that's kind of the lens we're going to be looking at these through. Like they're not going to be coming in and just being like, these are lands we are definitely going to be running. We're going to be talking about them. We're going to be discussing the ones that we like. We're probably going to be comparing them to the original versions of these as well, because there's now 2 full cycle of creature lands out there. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about them. They're kind of like, if we say they're good, you can only run so many dual lands in a cube. They're more like to see play in larger cubes, or if they end up being cheap in more budget-based cubes. But that's just something to kind of keep in mind as we talk about them.
Yeah, for sure. So the first land we have up is Restless Anchorage. This is a land that enters battlefield tapped and can tap for a blue or a white mana. And you can play 1 a blue and a white to, until end of turn Restless Anchorage into a 2/3 white and blue bird creature with flying. It's still a land. And whenever Restless Anchorage attacks, you create a map token. This, I think, is a really solid rate, actually. Pretty cheap to activate, and the fact that you get an actual permanent advantage just off the attack is really strong. The evasion means you can be able to trigger that a bit more often. It pressures planeswalkers really nicely. I'm really high on this one. I think this is one of the better ones. The only issue I have with it is that it's probably, I think with all of these, it's unlikely you're going to be running 2 creature lands for many given color pair, so we do have to compare them a little bit to the original cycle. And the blue and white one was probably the strongest of the original cycle. That was, of course, Celestial Colonnade, which turns into a 4/4 Vigilance. Listen, I think you can make arguments for this over Celestial Colonnade. Obviously, much cheaper to activate, and you get that map token, which is really nice. But Colonnade's really, really good. Like, it just kills planeswalkers dead. The fact it has Vigilance is really nice, because you can use the extra mana post-attacks. Cutting Colonnade's going to be a hard sell for me, but I do really rate this land. I think it is quite strong.
No, definitely. Like, there is a world where, like, this is cheaper to activate. Like, Colonnade is, like, 5 mana, not including this. This is 3 mana, not including this. Like, if you're more tempo-y in blue-white, and you care about the artifact token being made, that's the world where you run this. But otherwise, yeah, completely agree. Celestial Colonnade is probably the best of all of the creature, or like, at least of all the creature lands up until this point. This is only the first one we've gone through in this one, in this set. But from the original cycle of 10 and the previous cycle of 5 from Eldraine, Celestial Colonnade is probably the best one out of all of those. So this is going to have this is going to have a very hard time to get in over that. But let's see if the next one can do it. Next up, we have Restless Prairie. This also enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for a green and a white. You can pay 2 a green and a white, and Restless Prairie becomes a 3/3 green and white llama creature token until end of turn. It's still a land. When it attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. I actually quite like this one. Obviously, it's better in like a token deck or a go wide deck, which is something that Selesnya does do fairly often. Like even if it's not a specific go wide strategy, green and white will just have a lot of creatures. That's generally what those colors are doing. They're putting things onto the board. So the incidental Lord effect on a land, I think, is actually pretty strong. This is also way better than Stirring Wildwood, which is 3 mana to activate, and it becomes a 3/4 with reach. Like, that's okay. It's turning into a fine on-rate creature, but like this could actually just like buff up your whole board and potentially win you a game. Like, I quite like Restless Prairie. I'm quite high on this one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it has an obvious advantage over Stirring Wildwood in that this one becomes a llama and Stirring Wildwood doesn't.
That is very true. Yeah.
So pretty big edge there, I'd say. I think this is the first llama in Magic. Feel free to correct me in the comments, but
and we're not including changelings, everyone. It's specifically.
Yeah. Oh yeah, don't be that person. Oh, Mutavolt's a llama, guys. No. Yeah, no, I think this is pretty solid. It is a bit awkward, but like obviously it doesn't buff itself, and 3/3s are pretty easy to block. It does a slightly different thing from Sowing Wildwood, right? Sowing Wildwood is a very good creature land to block with. It's a very good creature land to attack with. But generally you want to be using them on attacks anyway. So yeah, I like this card a lot. I think it does some pretty good things with green white.
Nice, cool.
Cool. So next up we have the blue-black one. This is Restless Reef. Enters battlefield taps for a blue or a black. And for 2 a blue and a black, so 4 mana total. Until end of turn, Restless Reef becomes a 4/4 blue and black shark creature with Death Touch. And when Restless Reef attacks, target player mills 4 cards. Yeah, this is fine. I think the mill. I think more often than not, you'll want to target yourself. We spoke earlier about how generally cards in graveyard are a pretty meaningful resource in Cube, unless you think you have a very legitimate chance of milling them out very quickly. You probably want to target yourself. Most scenarios, it's not going to be that impactful. So really, we're just talking about 4/4 Death Touch, which is strong. But it's very blockable. It's for this repeated mana investment, you may be hoping for a little bit more. And this is running into another one that really, probably the second or first best of the original cycle was the blue-black one, Creeping Tar Pit, but the 3 mana becomes a 3/2 unblockable. Unblockable being huge, it like kills planeswalkers dead. It's a really good clock. Yeah, I think this is fine, but I think we're cutting Tar Pit for it. I don't know what you think.
I think they're different decks. Again, it's kind of what your guild section is doing. So I think Tar Pit's oddly like more like tempo-y, if I'm honest with you. Like maybe like I actually quite like this in a bit more of a control deck. I know that kind of the Tar Pit can, like, if you're just killing everything with all your spells, Tar Pit can in theory be the thing that kind of it just gets through every turn. I kind of get that, but like,
yeah, what's your win con? I've got a Creeping Tar Pit.
but the thing is, like, the threat of activation on this is very high. Like, this is a 4/4 Death Touch is trading with pretty much everything they're going to throw at you. So if this stops someone attacking you a couple of times, you can be holding up your mana. If they don't attack because of the activation on this, or the threat of the activation on this, you can just use your kill spell and pick off a creature. You can hold up counter magic. Like, I don't think that's nothing. I think proactively, kind of like the mill is nice, but again, I think just because of the templating of the card, it's more likely that this is going to be defensive because of the Death Touch, if I'm honest. Yeah. I think it's more you tailor what you want to what your guild section is doing. Like if you're doing like tempo-y ninja stuff, then you run Tar Pit. If you're trying to be a bit more control-y, then you run Restless Reef. Is what I think.
Yeah, I could see it. My inclination is that Tar Pit is just enough of a stronger card. Like,
fair, yeah.
Because you generally don't tend to be like, I'm leaving up my land activation mana every turn for a bunch of turns, right? But it is really good at like getting in there once and killing a planeswalker, or when the game. And I mean, they both do the thing of the game goes really long to kill someone. But yeah, I do rate this land. I think it's good. Yeah, I think it's close. But
how big is Tar Pit? Sorry, is it a 3/2 or is it
3/2? Yeah, 3/2
unblockable. Yeah, that's pretty close actually, and guaranteed getting it through. Yeah, that is no fair. Let's move on to our Gruul land. We have Restless Ridgeline. It enters the battlefield tapped. It taps for a red and a green, and for 2 a red and a green, it becomes a 3/4 red and green dinosaur creature until end of turn. And whenever it attacks, another target attacking creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Untap that creature. So, I think this is good. The body is kind of what Gruul decks wants. It can beat down and obviously survives a Wrath. But obviously we have to compare it to Raging Ravine, which is the same mana to activate. That becomes a 3/3 that when you attack, it puts a counter on itself. So if you do that, over multiple turns, it will kind of eventually grow higher. I think I prefer Raging Ravine, if I'm honest. I think this obviously requires you to have another creature to get its full effect, whereas with Raging Ravine, the bigger creatures is more like just keep getting through. And yes, the first attack, this is in theory adding 5 power to your attacks. It's giving the other creature +2. It is a 3/4. But after like the second turn, when you just keep swinging in with the Raging Ravine, I think it just, like the math works out. It just gets bigger. And the other part as well is because Raging Ravine's been printed so many times, it's like 20p. So I think, I think Raging Ravine will work out to be slightly better, and just the cost factor for the time being means I don't think, unless you open it at pre-release and you want to run it, I wouldn't recommend kind of picking this up over Raging Ravine, just because I think Raging Ravine is slightly better and way cheaper.
Yeah, 100%. I would agree. I think it's fairly close, but probably Raging Ravine just ahead. It does bear mentioning, probably bear mentioning earlier, in fact, there's a slight difference in the way these lands are templated versus the old one, which can be somewhat impactful. Definitely can be on this land. So the old ones, they gain the ability when you pay the mana and activate them.
Oh.
Whereas these ones just says when Restless Ridgeline attacks. That's not tied to paying the mana. So that does mean that if Restless Ridgeline becomes a creature through some other means, say you use 5 mana Nissa and you turn Restless Ridgeline into a 3/3 elemental, it will still have this attack trigger, which is kind of nice. But there is also an upside in the way the old ones were worded, particularly with Raging Ravine, in that if you had a ton of mana, you could pay that 4 mana multiple times and get multiple triggers when you attack. Which was, obviously a very silly way of wording it, but that is how the card works, and that can come up be relevant.
I think we've spoken about this before. It might have either been with Josh or about Josh, where this this was used as a storm win condition, which is awful, but also I'm all here for it. Is that right?
I've certainly seen Lava Claw Reaches to use
Lava Claw Reaches, that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay, yeah. Yeah, I knew there was one of these that was used for.
Well, you definitely could win with a Raging Ravine in Storm. That sounds great. Nice. Cool. So the last land, and in fact our last card of the day, is Restless Vents. This is the red-black one, so ETB's taps for a red or a black. And for 1, a black and a red, so 3 mana total. Now, until end of turn, Restless Vents becomes a 2/3 black and red insect creature with menace. And finally, when Restless Vents attacks, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. This is great. I really rate this. A rummage is really impactful, especially later in the game when you don't tend to activate your creature lands until you've basically run out of other good stuff to do. And in that scenario, you're very likely to have like an excess land or whatever in your hand that you can easily discard to this, and then it becomes close to draw a card. And the menace means there's a pretty good chance you can get a good attack with this. I'm really, really high on this one, and I think, and it's certainly a lot better than Lava Claw Reaches, which was the black-red one of the old cycle, and probably the weakest the whole cycle.
Apart from the storm potential, obviously.
Apart from the storm potential, yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like the Restless Vents is probably one of the best ones, and it's the upgrade is way noticeable in this one compared to the other ones. I completely agree. I think this card's really good. Right, so before we get you out of here, as always, me and James are going to do our top 5 most impactful cards of the set. These are the cards that we think are going to make the biggest splash. But James, do you want to take it away with your number 5?
Sure. So in number 5, I have got Deep Cavern Bat. This is the Mesmeric Fiend with flying and lifelink. And it's a very meaningful upgrade to a card that sees a lot of play. So I think this will also see a lot of play, and yeah, that 2-point life swing a turn, that really matters. I have high hopes for this one.
Nice. My number 5 is Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, the baby Lady of the Blade Reforged. This is just going to kill people. It's going to get out of hand. It's going to give you a ton of advantage. This is probably a staple in red aggressive sections going forward. In other sets, this would definitely be higher, but I think there's actually quite a lot of impactful cards from this set. So, yeah, that's why it's only number 5 on mine.
Sure. Makes sense. So, number 4, I went for Molten Collapse. This is the slightly upgraded Dreadbore. It's just really good value. Like, I understand it's not the splashiest card in the world, but I think, but when you get your 2-for-1, it's going to feel incredible. And I was already pretty happy playing my Dreadbore, so I'm going to be running this most times I can cast it.
Nice. No, very cool. Yeah, it is a very strong card. My number 4, and I've realized that while originally you had all the hard ones to say, I've now given myself them to pronounce in this section. My number 4 is Amalia Benavides Aguirre. I think this card has the highest ceiling of any card on my list, just because of the potential combos that it could bring. If you're just playing it as a creature, I think it's a counter when it gains life, then it will be fine. It'll do that. But if there's a world where we can combine this with Wildgrowth Walker and start doing some cool combos, there are other combos that want to be with Soul Sisters, that kind of stuff. If that's a new archetype that can exist because of that, then I think this has the potential to be a really cool, impactful card, and it's something I'm going to be kind of toying with and seeing where we can get with it.
Nice, yeah, for sure. It definitely has some good potential, that one. So for number 3, I went for Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel. This card seems like so solid to me. Just like all upside, great threat, gets you selection, has potential if you get to those 4 counters to really go crazy. And the flash just gives it so much more flexibility. I think you're barely going to be cutting this card from the deck.
No, exactly. I was wondering when our lists would intertwine, and they have at number 3. Mine is also Malcolm. Yeah, for everything you said, and it's just a noticeable upgrade on the versions of this effect that we already have, and we also don't have to run Daybound, Nightbound, which I will mention again. Yeah, really looking forward to getting Malcolm. Also a rare, should be nice and cheap, but yeah, very good, very cool card.
Nice. So number 2, I went for Inti, Seneschal of the Sun.
Nice. Yeah.
All of the reasons you said. Really nice. But you just get so much for 2 mana with this card. Like the real potential to snowball, great early, great late, nothing bad to say about it.
No, very cool. My number 2, I feel a bit boring putting this on the list, but it's Get Lost. While it is only a slight upgrade to Fateful Absence, it's still a big jump from there to the cards that are below that. So while there might just be a world where it just replaces Fateful Absence as the card in a cube, what we could actually see is it replaces, like, it changes something like a Planar Disruption or a Portable Hole. It basically reduces the gap, but basically there's now like 4 or 5 really good ones, and then there's a drop off. This is adding to that top echelon of white removal, and the bigger the cube, the more likely. This will be more impactful for bigger cubes, but I still think it's going to be it's still a card we will see a lot of in plenty of cubes.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. So my number 1, I went for Bitter Triumph. This was the 2 mana black Hero's Downfall, where you can either pay 3 or discard a card. I just don't see many cubes not running this. It seems like kind of the new standard of what you get for a 2 mana black instant speed removal, which is definitely a category that you see some of in most cubes. yeah, Vip Hero's downfall, you have been replaced. And yeah, this is... Yeah, I just don't see many reasons not to put missing cubes and cast this a lot.
No, 100%. Bitter Triumph is also my number one. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. This will be in every cube and should be in every cube that can run it. So any cube from Peasant upwards should probably just run this card. Like, it's an uncommon. Hopefully it'll be like a quid or two after it's been released. At most, there's no reason to not run this card and just cut your worst bit of black removal. Just play it. It's going to be a staple. I'm not going to say forever, because they are getting better, actually. But at least for the next 5 years, I would say, it's probably in.
Yeah. I'm sure someone said at some point that Doomblade would be a staple forever. So, yeah, fair point.
No, fantastic. Right, I think that's going to do it for the episode. James, pleasure as always. A lot of cool cards for us to go through today.
Yeah, always good reviewing the new ones.
No, exactly. Yeah, I think there's more I'm probably going to be buying in this set than the last couple, if I'm honest with you. Like, there's some very cool, very synergistic cards. Some of the ones I want to try, worst case, I'll play them in Commander.
No, for sure. Like, I really noticed putting together a top 5 list. Like, sometimes I'm sort of reaching around for number 5. This time I was like, well, I have 9 uncuttables from this list.
Yeah, super strong set. So yeah, also looking forward to getting our hands on them at pre-release next weekend. That should be a ton of fun. But yeah, just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening. Do please follow the podcast, tell a friend, leave a 5-star review, whatever the positive affirmation that your podcast platform lets you do, please do that. It would really help us out grow the podcast. But until next time, we will see you all soon. Goodbye.